the smartest military in the world, right?
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
Any consequences for anybody for not taking the action if they...
And yeah, exactly. Well, it was embarrassment.
Well, I don't expect, you know, putting someone into prison or something like this.
Well, other than me and the guy who was allegedly flying the plane that was involved in the shooting down 93, who they don't want you to know about, who's been, you know, who was held in prison for a couple of years at least, and I don't know if he's out or not. I mean, they gave him a real hard time. So, yeah.
Susan, could you remind me again what the sanctions were for in Iraq? And two questions. And then I just wanted to get clear about what you were arrested for.
Good. The sanctions were on to punish Iraq for allegedly having weapons of mass destruction, and they said that they would keep the sanctions on Iraq until all weapons of mass destruction were confirmed to have been destroyed. Now, it appears that they were actually destroyed by the end of 96 or 97, but the United States was, you know, had an ulterior agenda, which was they were not going to let go of the sanctions until Saddam was out of power. But what had happened was, by the year 2000, while Bill Clinton was still in office, the international loathing for sanctions had become intense. 2 million people had died from sanctions. Between 1.7 million and 2.2 million had died. And the international community was violating the sanctions. The German pilots were and Jordanian pilots were, and actually it was coming from all over Europe. Germany was the first, and they had pilots fly humanitarian supplies over the air, through sovereign airspace, and land at Baghdad airport, and then a whole bunch of other countries followed suit, and they were all like, we're not going to do this. This is wrong, it is immoral, it is a crime against humanity, and we recognize that. And so at that point, the CIA, I wanted to do it, but at that point, the CIA knew that they were losing control of the situation and that they better step in and do something. And I wanted to end the sanctions, so I was glad the pilots were doing this. But the CIA was very, very expedient. It was politically expedient. They were losing control of the situation. They wanted to take back their power.
You were arrested for?
I was accused of several things. One, I was accused of acting as an unregistered Iraqi agent because I had delivered a letter to my cousin, who was the chief of staff to George Bush, telling him that the war in Iraq would be catastrophic, and begging him and outlining several of the consequences, like democracy would throw power to Islamic fundamentalists, and there would be a rise of terrorist attacks, and the Iraqi people hated the sanctions, and they would hate America for having done all this, and if they could get their hands on America, it would just be a very ugly, brutal occupation, and they'd fight us. That was my letter. I went to jail for that. And they also accused me of they called it unlawful financial transactions. I was accused, I'm not making this up, of allegedly eating 3 lunches, I'm not making this up, 3 lunches with Iraqi diplomats totaling $92.92. We have the receipts. And they called that a felony. I was accused there were secret charges against me, which we have deduced. We were never allowed to know what they were. See, on the Patriot Act, let me just tell you a little bit, because I think this is a good opportunity to explain. When I was indicted, under the Patriot Act, they're allowed to have secret charges and secret evidence and secret grand jury testimony. This is very much, the Patriot Act is modeled on the pretty much verbatim, in many page upon page, identical to the old communist criminal, let's see, I guess it's the Soviet, let's see, there's a long name for it, the Soviet Criminal Act, which set up the KGB apparatus and allowed people to make accusations against their neighbors without identifying themselves. And it set up the whole Gulag system. And the Patriot Act is modeled on that Soviet law, the Soviet Criminal Act. And it's, you know, almost verbatim to what that is. So, I mean, this is a really scary, scary law. But I was accused of like possibly, in the secret charges, one of the, we believe the secret charges was that I received a book from the Iraqis that was a book on depleted uranium. And that was considered classified because if we were to tell American soldiers about the health risks and the rise of cancer rates and birth defects, then it might demoralize American soldiers. Okay? And another thing was is that Saddam's government tried, I'm not making this up, another secret charge was that we believe, well, because I know what I was doing in the periods when of these like different, they'd have a date, and I would know approximately what I was doing on that date. And so another one was that the Iraqis tried to give the Bush administration several $100,000 in campaign contributions so that during the presidential election, because they wanted to show that they wanted to be friends with America. And I had reported that to my defense intelligence handler. He was like, holy shit, you got to tell the Iraqis not to do this. You got to make them not do this. And because it reminded them all of the Asian fundraising crisis under Clinton. And he said, don't they watch C-SPAN? Don't they know they're not supposed to do this? And he said, you go back and you tell them that if we find out they gave money to the Republican Party in this campaign, we're going to bomb them. We're going to, you know, but see, at this point, Iraq had been bombed so many times, you couldn't threaten them with bombing anymore because they'd already been attacked. How are you going to like impress on people who, oh, you're going to bomb us again? Okay. Sure. You know. So.
May I rewind to earlier in your talk? But I just wanted to know how you knew that Muhammad Atta was a CIA asset.
That's been very well established. They've admitted that he was a CIA asset.
So could you send me to like a reference or something so I'd be able to verify that? Can you recommend something?
I will find a reference for you and give it to these guys and yeah, sure. I'll get you some references on that. But it has been verified that he was. And he received some military training too. Sorry.
So, you know, I look on the audience here. We're pretty old. Do you go to I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm sorry. Do you go to universities or high schools, or because, you know, young people can steer things up, you know? Do some major changes, you know. Do you do that, or they say no, you cannot?
Well, actually, I've really just started doing this because my book came out just 6 months ago, and so I've done a lot of radio, and I've done a lot of blogging, and which is more youth, I guess, more younger. I don't know if that's not fair. That's not really fair to say that it's younger people, but I do a lot of radio and a lot of people, a lot of new media stuff. I would love to do that. I would love to do that. If I can get, this is really my first kind of book tour. So, but I would love to go to college campuses. I'm just kind of figuring out how to do it. Because part of the problem is the corporate media will not cover my story at all. Even when I was locked up in prison, one of my favorite stories, I know you guys all love Amy Goodman, but Amy Goodman told Amy Goodman, oh, okay. Yeah. Well, you gotta hear what she did to me. When I was locked up, my boyfriend called her and talked to her producers and said, please, you know, Susan is the cousin of the chief of staff to the president. She covered the Iraqi embassy. She warned about 9/11. She's locked up on a military base on the Patriot Act, and they're refusing to give her a hearing. And she was the chief asset covering Iraqi pre-war intelligence. The government is saying that she's incompetent, and they're saying that that assets were incompetent, and yet she's accused, and he gave her the letter, the Andy Card letter, and said, you know, she wrote this letter, and she turned out it was right on all fronts, and couldn't you please interview her? Couldn't you do a story? Please help us. And you know what she did? She said, well, you know, maybe her attorney thinks this is a good strategy. We wouldn't want to upset things for settling the case.
She's been told to stay away from the story.
Yeah, but you know, she did. She took it, she did it herself, and she's to blame for it. And I will tell you, I will never forgive Amy Goodman for that. And my boyfriend was like in tears. He was weeping. I mean, he was a retired Navy guy. And you guys, you know, Navy guys don't, I mean, you know men, you know, he's like, some men don't cry. He cried. He broke down in tears. And you know, men is hard for sometimes. For some men, not all men, some men cry. I know that, but he did. He was really upset, and he was just like, she won't do this. And he was just like heartbroken. And he was heartbroken for me. And he was just like, and I was locked up in prison at the time, and I'm on the prison phone. What the fuck do you mean Amy Goodman won't do this? How could she not think this is the right story? What did you say to her to make her not do this story? And he was like, I don't know. I told her. I said, did you say this and this and this? And he said, yeah. So.
Yeah, I heard you on the Jeff Brent's program last week.
Oh,
This week.
on Libya.
On Libya. And so that's very similar, isn't it, to what's happening in Iraq?
There is no reason for the United States to be invading Libya at all. There is no justification for this. It's ironic because we're fighting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Iraq, and Libya is actually, the Libyan rebels are radical Islamists who are trying to institute Sharia. And whether you like Sharia or whether you like the Islam, whether you like Gaddafi or not, see, this is where it gets you, you're an asset. Whether you like Gaddafi, you may hate him, you may think he's bad, but the facts are that the rebels are Islamic radicals. They do want to institute Sharia, and at least be honest and say it. Because that's what you're going to get. And don't pretend you're somewhere else. Don't pretend these are people who are doing something different than what you say. That is what their goal is. And they don't want democracy. Gaddafi has been in power for 41 years, and I know it's time for change, but he has also had a tremendous track record on women's rights. They do not have to wear the abaya. They are free not to get married if they don't want to. They are free to women are free to get divorces if they want. And when we talk about Sharia, what I mean is that the Libyan rebels want the women to wear the burqa. An abaya is the burqa where they cover their hair and stuff. They don't have to do that now. They're going to have to do it in the future. They do not want the women to have the right to reject marriage proposals. Under Gaddafi's government, an imam actually visits the women before a marriage and sits with them privately, which is really unheard of, and makes sure that the women are not being pressured into a marriage. And if the young woman says that she is being pressured, the imam is, under the law of Libya, the imam has to protect the woman from the abuse of the relatives. And so he has to give her a chance to reject the marriage when nobody is there to pressure her to do it, because this is what happens in Islamic families.
Is it NATO facing defeat?
Right now, there is a counter-coup going on in Libya, in Benghazi, and there's all kinds of dramatic stuff that's happening. So Gaddafi's...
Calling in strikes on each other.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's true. So, but it's still, it's you know, so...
Hasn't Gaddafi been a pretty good ally to the West in recent years?
Absolutely.
So why is NATO supporting the rebels if they're in favor of Sharia? I don't understand why NATO is supporting.
It is very interesting. Gaddafi has Libyan oil costs $1 per barrel to produce, and the United States had preferential contracts already. The United States and France and Britain all had, they could take as much oil as they wanted, and most of the oil does not come to the United States. It does, however, go to Italy and France and Britain. So it's a major source of European oil, and yet what Gaddafi was doing was, Gaddafi also has gold. And I think it's very interesting that we have this major financial crisis, and now we're attacking a country that has both oil and a huge private reserve of gold on its own land, and like 500, I would have to double check this fact, but it's like 500 tons of gold in its bank vaults. 143. I stand corrected. 143 tons of gold, correct? Something like that. And we're trying to take their gold and their oil. And it's so dirty, it's a dirty fight, and it's just...
Why would